Hey, good afternoon, everybody. It's Monday, noon Pacific. So, you know what that means? It's content chat time. I'm your host, Erika Heald. And today we're going to be talking all about how content can create a truly useful, differentiated brand with my guest, Alexandre Gravel, who is dialing in from a colder clime. Although, here in California, I'm like, oh, I'm so cold while I'm wearing a short sleeve top. So,
And I'm
Alex,
not.
thank you so much for joining us today. And how about you take a moment to let folks know who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thank you very much, Erica, for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here. Alexandre Gravel, I'm actually founder of Group Toast, which is comprised of two entities, Toast Studio on one end and Avanti Toast on the other. What we do basically, and what we've been doing for the past 25 years, is basically produce content. So what we've been doing on one side, producing content for television broadcasters and streaming platforms. And on the other, which is what we're going to talk most about today, is actually producing and strategizing and operating content for brands and advertisers. And my role is eternal intern at Toast for the past 25 years. So basically, been learning and being constantly renewing how and what we do for the past 2.5 decades.
So I'm going to tell everyone a secret, which is the impetus for today's conversation came because a mutual friend, Kathy McKnight, introduced the two
Yes.
of us because I had a client who was looking for a Canadian-based studio to help them with a large-scale web content project. And when the two of us started chatting, we had one of those conversations that spilled over past where it was supposed to be in the confines of our calendars because we were just having so much fun and we were so aligned. And this was one of the things we were talking about, which, especially when it comes to web content, there's so many brands who say that they are, they want to differentiate. They say that they're not the same as all of their competitors. Yet when you look at them, all of their websites are the same. They have the same boring content. They have the same boring, web design, the same approach, that they're putting out there for that user experience. And worst of all, they're pushing product. And no one says, hey, I really want to go to a website to look for some product information unless that product is a broken thing and you're looking for how to return it or how to fix it. So let's just start there around what is a truly useful brand? How would you define that?
Well, I like the fact that you bring usefulness into this and the fact that, and you talked about differentiation and usefulness. And the way I see it is that there are multiple ways for a brand to differentiate itself. It could be in how the brand image is built because it's very different, for example, for the other players in the industry. It could be in the tone they use if we go closer towards content and their approach and basically the posture they have in the industry in regards to their competitors, and the tone they have is different. But there is a third way that I found over the past few years, and that's where we really connected and we had this great chat, is that brands that make themselves useful in their own industry, their own vertical, their own sector is actually another way to be differentiated. And by being useful, I mean by that, you were saying boring content, same old boring content. By being useful is you're actually bringing something new to the industry, something new to the market, something new to your potential customers, clients, and so on. And so being useful is actually bringing value. And not a lot of brands do that. Many brands actually just want to be there. They want to have mental availability and they want to be just in the market. They want to be available whenever someone might need them. But there's a way to go one step further. And I think that's by being useful. And being useful, when I say that, to answer your question, is actually bring something new in the market. And when I mean something new, is something that will be of value to the stakeholders, to the clients, to the audiences that you're speaking to.
So do you have some examples? Maybe, this can be get clients, current clients or clients you wish that you were your clients because they do such a good job, of brands that really kind of embody the spirit of being that useful kind of a brand from a content standpoint?
So I like to go towards the easy examples when talking about this. So if we go to, let's say, a B2B market, I think that, and it's not the only one, a lot of the tech brands do this, is actually bring value to the customers. And I think, for example, Salesforce has been doing that extremely well for over a decade now.
Yep.
And how do they do that? Is that basically, well, Salesforce being Salesforce and all the modules and extend and all that they have, and how deep they become part of an organization, they actually touch on so many employees. And what they do with content is that they basically end up producing content for each of these types of employees or departments. So you'll have, simplifying, of course, you'll have content that is how to be a better CMO, how to be a better BI analyst, so they'll actually bring in content in the market that actually helps their potential users, in their case, or customers, be better at what they do, be a better version of themselves. So this is an example of what the tech B2B space, and a lot of the B2B space, had actually done over the past few years. So that's what I mean about being useful. It's actually bring value to the actual humans that you're speaking to. In the B2C space, tourism is a classic. So any airline, any hotel chain that actually is able to bring content that will either improve or bring new discoveries to potential travelers, either business or personal, is something that actually can make them differentiated from the other guys. Now, tourism is an example where it can become extremely crowded because everyone wants that top 10 things to do in New Orleans, of course, but where you are able to become useful is sometimes not necessarily through the exact content that you produce, but in how you distribute it. Is it in a timely manner? You distribute it at the proper time, in the proper way to the potential travelers or the actual travelers? That's always a good thing. And that's another example of actually being useful with information. And the third one, it's really, and I like going back to the classics, Red Bull Media House, what they've been doing for the past 15, 20 years is actually bring entertainment to their potential customers and buyers of their products. And that's through entertainment and what they've been doing with extreme sports and everything they've done over the past decade and a half, almost 2 decades now.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned Salesforce because I'm, super biased because I've done quite a bit of content work with them. But one of the things that I wanted to call out that, is part of what you were talking about with their approach is they elevate their customers by doing things like, instead of having just a boring case study that follows the same, standard format, fits on a page, all that kind of stuff, they actually will have their best customers, actually present at their events. They'll have a writer interview them and write a first person blog post from them. So that way it's amplifying the customer's voice, amplifying the customer as a thought leader, and giving you that real inside scoop on what doing something like implementing a chatbot can do to change your workflows from a relatable, non-brand, non-product pushing standpoint. And that to me is just such the great example of really trying to be outrageously useful, both with the content that you are creating and how you're getting it done. So they don't even necessarily put themselves out there as, the author or the knowledge experts. They have this whole infrastructure of users, customers and the Salesforce MVPs that they have elevated, who create so much of this really useful content. And I think that's, it's just amazing. And it's a completely differentiated strategy.
And what you just mentioned, that I love the word, the word elevating. I think it's so appropriate to this conversation, and the fact that the way we're framing the conversation we're having right now is thinking about a few brands that we just mentioned, or any other clients that we might have, or the people listening, but through the eyes of the customers, through the eyes of the audiences. We didn't talk about selling the hotel room. We didn't talk about selling energy drinks. We didn't talk about selling an actual tech platform. We thought about elevating the people that will eventually or are buying a tech platform, are traveling, are buying a can of energy drink. We are really looking at the value we can bring to them through their eyes, and that's very important. And the reason, and what you were mentioning about same old boring content, is the fact that you're only looking at it through your own prism, your own eyes, and you're thinking about your product. You're thinking about what you need to sell. So you're basically talking, of course, about yourself. You'll need to talk about that at some point. But to differentiate yourself from the others, how about you bring some value to them, go beyond the mind, and maybe go a little deeper towards the heart.
Now, of course, when folks are looking to differentiate their brand, for every Red Bull that does a great job of, embracing, becoming this like lifestyle brand and amplifying all of these extreme sports folks doing amazing stuff, for example, for every company that puts the money in that direction and really hits it out of the park, there are also all of the brands that do things like, what was the platform with the virtual, I always forget its name, which Second Life. There are all
Yeah.
the brands that were like, oh, we're going to have a really great Second Life pavilion. And it's like, well, that's not going to cut it because nobody was using that and it wasn't compelling. So let's talk about some of the mistakes that brands make when they decide, yes, we want to differentiate with content. And let's talk through that a little bit. And so that way we can help people gain the confidence to not make those mistakes.
I think one of the first one is thinking that everything's been done and there's no more room for anything new. The example about tourism, the hotel industry, the hospitality industry is a great one. Everything has been done. There's been a top 10 things to do in every single neighborhood, city, name it. What you can do, which is differentiating, is actually delivering that content a bit differently. And I'm not talking VR, XR, AR. I'm talking just deliver it at the right time. Don't post it in February on your socials. Make sure that 24 hours before people arrive, or actually half an hour before, right after they checked in, you are able to actually send that content, for example. And that's being useful. Useful doesn't necessarily mean doing something entirely different. It can mean doing something in the proper way. So one of the first mistakes, I think, is not doing anything because, hey, you think that those top tens or whatever the trends or what's new or whatever has been done. There's another way to actually bring it to the people in a better way. There's always a better way to deliver content. The second one that I've seen sometimes is actually going a little too far off a tangent from your core business, thinking that, hey, that hasn't been done, or someone in the company really likes this kind of theme, let's do that. And there's no real connection between what you're offering as content and who you are or what you are selling. Because in the end, we're all selling widgets and services and so on. We don't need to diverge from that. We need to stay focused on our brand. But going too far off a tangent can be a risk. And the third one is, you mentioned it straight on first, is just talking about the product, is focusing on the product, the service, or the offering, and not necessarily bringing value to what people need or expect as content. And those two words are extremely important. And those are more than the ways of how to do it, but thinking about the needs and expectations of the audiences is core to making this work. But the three things that I see people not doing is really just throwing in a towel because you think that everything's been done. Second one is going off a tangent. And third one is forgetting that you want to bring value and you're actually not differentiating at all.
Well, this is timely that we're having this conversation on March 10th, So this is live on March 10th because we're coming up on the annual showcase of bad ideas in marketing that pretty much relates to all of those missteps, and that is April Fool's Day content. Now, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to blame Google, but let's just blame Google and say that because somebody at Google had a good idea one time about, hey, let's have a really great April Fool's joke where we make something funny happen on the search page or on maps or what have you, then all of a sudden every tech company had to have an April Fool's prank. And then every consumer, regular old, every company wanted to have an April Fool's joke. But the thing is most of them are not funny. They are not on brand, and they give people rage when they find out that thing that sounded outrageous to the person in marketing who created it is actually not a new product offering. Why is it not a new product offering?
That and the Christmas card. Those are two yearly projects that you don't want to be involved in. The Christmas card and the April Fool's whatever. I think those are two, those should be put really, really far away in a bin somewhere. They don't bring value, and they waste a lot, sometimes too much of people's time. It can be fun sometimes, but I haven't heard a lot of people saying, "Oh, we had so much fun doing the Christmas card." I haven't heard that in a while.
I don't think I've ever heard that, to be clear.
Well, honestly, I've never heard that. To be frank, I just wanted to be.
You're being nice. You're being nice.
But so the Christmas card and the April Fools, yeah, the bad content idea. The other one that I like or dislike a lot, which actually brings no value and doesn't make you useful at all in your market, is any form of international day of something. That doesn't bring anything. The International Bagel Day or Hugging Day, or I don't know, unless you're a bagel company, there's no need for you to actually publish anything on that day related to bagels.
Well, you see that a lot with, even things like federal holidays. And if you are running a brick and mortar business where people are having an expectation that you are accessible to them during specific hours and you're not because of the holiday, okay, then yeah, you need to note that holiday. But otherwise, you end up being like the mattress sales company that had the sale on 9/11. It's like that's not an appropriate commemoration tie-in for your promotion. And just in general, it's just a bad idea to try to glom on to these kinds of things because it's off-brand. It isn't providing value to your customers. And it can frequently end you in a place where you become an irrelevant brand that gets muted or blocked, or worse yet, noted as spam in the email inbox.
And even worse, you become irrelevant in your own organization because you have a hard time justifying what you're doing if what you're doing is actually talking about the International Bagel Day or International Hugging Day. We already have a hard time, let's be honest. We already have a hard time demonstrating day in, day out the actual value, the actual numbered value of content. We know everyone knows there's a lot of value, but actually putting a number on it is very hard. Let's not shoot ourselves in the foot by doing those bad ideas.
Totally. And what's cool is that you can do really differentiated, really useful content without it costing you a bunch of money. And an example I can give from my own content creation is whenever I go to any kind of an event or we go on vacation, I have a wheat allergy. I can't eat wheat. So I make it a point of doing a bunch of research in advance to see where am I going to be able to eat. I even try to find us a hotel that has a restaurant that has a lot of gluten-free options, because inevitably you're going to have one of those days or evenings where it's late and you're hungry and you just can't even deal with leaving the hotel. So I do a lot of research, and then I actually publish a piece of content around the best places, the best restaurants for eating gluten-free in that city. So if you search for eating gluten-free in Cleveland or San Francisco or Sacramento, you're going to see Erika's Gluten-Free Kitchen at the top of the results, because I'm not just regurgitating a list of here are all the chain restaurants available to you, or here's some places that might have one thing you can eat on the menu. It's me going in with pictures of the really tasty food that I had and why I think you should eat at these places. What did that cost me? Well, it cost me the time to do the research up front. It cost me the time, and the money of eating the meal and putting up the blog post. And yet that kind of content is something that if you are in any kind of a niche, any regional niche, any industry niche, you can take a big topic that you think, well, everyone's already talking about this topic, but you can tilt it a little bit so that way it's talking specifically to your customers and a specific need that they have, or something that they've had a really hard time figuring out, that you happen to already have access to that specialized knowledge.
And I think that speaks so much to the idea of always be trying to figure out what the needs and expectations are of the audience that you want to reach. Because when you start having that posture and thinking about them every day of the week, you start uncovering gaps that you hadn't thought at first. And this is one thing that I always stress with clients when working on operations and strategy, is to always keep ideating and just jotting down things that you notice in the market, things that you notice that are well covered, things that you notice that are not well covered, things that you notice that are not covered, because at some point you will need these ideas. This brainstorming of what should we do shouldn't happen once a year, and it shouldn't happen for tomorrow's post. It should happen on a constant basis. And we all know, and I'm sure everyone here, because we're very professional, we have a content parking where we just park ideas, and eventually we just grab off those, which avoids the International Day of the Bagel. Now, another thing that works well is actually asking your audience what they need and expect from you specifically, and keep that an open answer, keep that an open question. I mean, because what you will sometimes uncover with those is actually blind spots that you would have never thought about covering, never thought about it being a need. And suddenly, because you thought, well, everyone knows that, well, maybe not. And you could cover that and bring, actually elevating the people that you are reaching in a better way, in a way that actually brings value to them, in a way that makes their day better in some way or shape or form. So the needs and expectations is always at the core of any content strategy. But in wanting to be useful in the market is actually being able to figure out what people need. And it's the same words of putting your audience first. It means the same thing, but it puts the mind in another mindset in some way, allowing you to really think about them and trying to uncover those blind spots that maybe no other competitor or player in the market covered.
Well, it's interesting because, again, we're not being paid by Salesforce, but Salesforce takes advantage of their knowledge of their customers, their deep knowledge of their customers, to do things like fielding research for their different industries that they serve and for the different types of solutions they have. So that way, when people are trying to go in and make the case for changing or a process or changing a way of thinking about doing something, that people have fresh data, because they know that, especially if you're in a large company, you've got to put together that PowerPoint deck with your business case for investing in doing something differently, or to invest in bringing on some new software. And to do that, you've got to have data, and it's got to be from your exact market, your region, all of those things. So that's an example of looking at, what data do you have? What, information do you have, or can you get on a regular basis and give back to your customers to be useful? Or it can be something like, let's say, like the Blanchard executive leadership training folks. They have like the SL2 servant leadership courses, and all these different courses where they're bringing together C-suite executives for improving their leadership skills development, well, they have all of this great content. That's a huge part of what they do, obviously, because they are a learning company. But the connections that people would have in the classes was really such the like added benefit and value, and where they got to where people really were able to deepen their learning. So they ended up launching a community that's part of being one of their customers. So that way, when you're taking those courses and immersing yourself in this new approach, well, you can also, have access to those people after you've taken the course. And that's exactly the kind of listening to your customer to come up with, completely new approaches to being able to serve up content and connections.
And doing that, I love this example that you just mentioned, is that doing that, you're actually bringing value to the market, what we discussed, and you have the courage to bring something new that might be useful to your competitors too. When
Yeah.
you're publishing a state of something, it's not state of yourself, it's state of that industry, it's
Yep.
state of whatever. Could be AI. We're in 2025, everything's AI. State of whatever AI. Well, that's not just for you, it's actual knowledge that is and insights that are available to an entire industry. And doing that actually takes courage, and doing that actually makes you have the upper hand, or playing the adult in the room and saying, hey, I know all this, let me share that with the industry and let's see what people do with it. And that will always create this positive memory of your brand in the minds of the people that came across it. Of course, some people will read your study and go to the competitor. Fine, but even if you had not published that study, there's a good chance they would have gone there anyways. So
Yep.
it doesn't make any difference in the top or the bottom line. But having that presence in industry as being in some industries, that's really important, as being the expert of. So if I'm publishing a state of something, I'm stating that, hey, I am the expert on this subject. So if you want to have a chat with us about our products or services, hey, we're the expert. Come on in. We'll be glad to speak with you. And that's actually a great way to bring value. It can work in B2B, and it can work in B2C too. I'm thinking about what Marcus Sheridan has
Mm-hmm.
done for so many years, and his own example of selling fiberglass pools. He became the de facto reference on the ins and outs of fiberglass pools, and that's worthwhile content for any fiberglass pool
Yep.
seller or manufacturer.
And I mean, and that to me is what's so interesting and powerful about content, is if you create content that is really useful and relevant, it is going to be useful for your competitors too. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, because there are, in most cases, there are plenty of companies, plenty of business to go around, and you actually can benefit from creating that agnostic kind of content. When I was at Achievers, which was an employee engagement platform, we had a big competitor, Global Force, who did all sorts of research. We were allowed to cite that research. Our head of marketing used to tweet at their head of marketing to congratulate them on things. Like, we actually, yes, we went head to head against them all the time, but that doesn't mean that we had to be adversarial, because that would have been really off brand for who we were and what we did. And there are so many companies where if a competitor puts out an amazing industry report, they're like, well, we need to have our own industry report. We don't want to talk about their report. And it's so silly, because when you look at like the marketing industry, you have Content Marketing Institute and marketing profs who collaborate on the best content marketing research every single year, and have done so for over a decade.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so much more powerful than if it was just one or the other of them putting out their own, individual piece. By coming together, it, allows both of their audiences to benefit too. So I think there's a lot of room for thinking up smart ways to come at it with differentiated content and differentiated ways of reaching people.
And having someone in your market publish a trend or industry or state of report that took them maybe 100 hours or 500 hours to produce just saved you 100 or 500 hours to actually have a point of view
Yep.
on what they found. There's a good reason why there are two players in the industry, because they have different products and different points of view. So if they did something, build upon it. You just save 500 hours to do the initial phase one. Do phase two of that study. Go a bit further. There's something else, and I'm not talking about dissing their report. I'm talking about bringing it even further towards what your clients and customers and audiences might want, and that I think makes industries move forward, makes industries do better. And that's very Canadian of me to say, don't diss the other report, just build upon it and embrace it. And actually just what you said, which is one CMO congratulating another CMO is amazing.
So one thing that you touched on a few minutes ago that we didn't go into because we went a little different way, is, you mentioned, of course, AI. AI is something that every marketer's email inbox is overflowing with. We're being invited to webinars. We're being, trying to be sold all sorts of tools for creating myriad content types and on different platforms. There's just like AI, AI, AI. So let's talk a little bit about AI, and I'd love to hear your perspective on where it fits and just in general what its impact is on content marketing right now.
Well, we're having this conversation and touching upon differentiation. For me, AI is not a way to differentiate yourself, of course, because AI is basically a tool of averages at the moment. Generative AI, I mean. We use AI in a very wide sense these days, but when you start talking about content, it's mostly about generative AI. Either images, videos more and more, we're getting there slowly, but copy also. But it's a game of averages. So basically, whenever you're spitting out content or producing content using AI, you're basically creating something very average, because it's basically, that's how AI works. It's basically the most probable word that will follow these 10 words. So you're not creating anything new. You're actually just averaging everything that's been produced up to this point. Of course, you can start prompting it to make it go deeper and more creative and so and so. But in the end, it's not that new. So the way I see it is that there's a danger of creating a lot, but not a danger. It's actually very real and happening right now, of creating very average content. So whenever you're not basing it off a data set that you actually own or data that you have, that you fed it in some shape or form, you are basically creating stock content. We all know about stock photography and we can spot it. Well, now more and more we'll start really knowing and spotting stock content when we see it, because it's just an average. It's just someone coming off a cab, a New York City yellow cab with a briefcase and a cell phone, shaking a hand in front of a tall glass building. That's stock photography, and we can spot it. So more and more we're going to see that with content. And actually, the more I see it, the more I think I can spot it fairly well. And I'm now scared of using single sentence bullet points these days, because I fear that people will think, oh, they did that with AI. No, we didn't. We actually wrote it, but it's in the shape of AI formed content. So we're trying to avoid that. But yeah, I think that's the big danger is in terms of creation. Now, as a tool, I find it amazing. What AI is really good, because it knows averages. It can spot when you're diverging from the average. It can spot when something is missing, something that should be there that isn't there in the structure of a piece of content, in a script, that you're submitting it before actually going on a shoot, in a blog post, in a newsletter. It can spot things that could be missing. Now, it could be an absolute voluntary choice to have omitted that usual way of doing things, and that makes it a bit different from what people are used to, which can be nice. but it's great at being a tool for that. But for me, the way I see it is that it's actually helping a lot. We actually used it internally last week when we basically analyzed over 300 hours of client meetings, and we basically fed the AI, asking it, can you spot all the challenges that were mentioned by clients, and basically make a file out of those. So we got about over 1,800 content challenges mentioned by clients in those hundreds of hours of meetings, and we basically used that to inform what we would be publishing this week. So it can help a lot as a tool. What's your take on it?
I totally agree. I love using AI to tell me like how good of a job did I do in representing the client's brand voice? Because I have like a very structured process I help people go through to create a brand voice chart, and I'm pretty good at writing to a brand voice chart, but you can have the AI objectively tell you, did you do a good job, or is there a word choice that maybe you should rethink? But, and this is a big bite, that requires that you've done all of those foundational things first. And content governance is something that so few organizations have really nailed. You have, folks, everyone has a brand guide, right? But how often is that brand guide just 50 pages of here's how the logo should stack up in different kinds of orientations and, with different kinds of content versus how your content needs to be different.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you take the time, though, to have that style guide in place to note, for example, I am not an AI, but I do use the M dash, which people seem to think means I'm an AI. I'm like, no, pretty sure. Because my writing voice is very similar to my speaking voice. And when I'm giving a presentation, I very clearly use an M dash in my speaking, and I use it in my writing too. So having all those kinds of things in place, creating templates that show, hey, when you're doing a specific kind of an email for a specific purpose, here's your structure for how you approach it, then you can hold yourself accountable by using AI and say, hey, how good of a job did we do in reflecting our mission, in reflecting our vision, in doing these things? And that to me is, the power for the AI, including for differentiation. You can have it go out and look at your 3 biggest competitors and find out, is their voice the same as yours? Are you actually differentiated, or do you just think that you are, but you're all really just a different shade of blue checked shirt?
Very often the case. And you see what you're mentioning there is exactly that, spotting what's missing. If you gave it guidelines, if you were able to tweak it in the way that, in how your brand speaks and how your brand's tone, manner, and so on actually executes and goes out into the wild world, you are able to ask it, am I on brand, or what's missing, or what's there that shouldn't be, and it will be an amazing tool at doing that. And actually it is great because it's faster than us humans, and it will be just a bit pickier in making sure that it spots pretty much, if you fed it well, pretty much everything that you wanted
Becomes your
mentioned.
content personal trainer.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. That's good. Because it's not only because you really, it's even better when it's not only showing what's wrong, but how to do it better, or maybe how to do it better. And that's where you get better and better and better. And I think those types of tools will be extremely handy to make sure that any brand can be differentiated, because it actually is publishing, posting, and distributing content that is unique, content that brings something new, or brings content in a way in its distribution or deployment that is different from the other guys. And that allows our brains to start thinking about that. And that's what I love about it. It's actually making sure that we can put our brain time and our neurons to good use.
I love that. Because especially if you're hiring an agency or you're hiring a consultant to come in and help you put together a content strategy that's aimed to really create differentiated content and to build those relationships with your ideal customers, you've got to be starting from that place of being willing to experiment, being, willing to take some chances, but also having enough discipline to realize you have to make a real concerted effort to do that. You have to have a content strategy. It can't be that just every day people come into the office and go, okay, what are we going to work on today? What
It's
should we
Thursday.
do next?
What do we do on Thursdays? Well, we send a newsletter on Thursdays. No, you don't send a newsletter because it's Thursday. You send a newsletter when you have something to say. But that's very hard for people because they think people expect their newsletter to come out on the 2nd of every month or the first Tuesday of whatever of every quarter. People are looking for actual content. They're looking for value. They're looking to be elevated. I love the expression that you use, the word that you used. So whenever you're just pushing out content because it's Tuesday, the first Tuesday, or name it, it will actually show, and people will actually tune out at some point if it doesn't bring any value. Now, there are great teams doing great work. They have too much to say, and they're really happy when that first Tuesday of the quarter comes in and they can finally post their content that they've been preparing for a while. But that's not always the case. So sometimes it's a case of trying to find those little gold nuggets.
So when you take on a new client and you hear that they really do have the heart and the stamina for making the change and going out there and having being really useful from a content standpoint, like what are some of the first steps that you help them do in order to start approaching things differently, putting that being differentiated and being relentlessly useful at front and center of their content strategy?
The first part of that differentiating aspect that we tackle is really all about the audiences. We all have those workshops, reunions, meetings about thinking about our audiences, but we like to do it one step further, which is actually starting to ask these audience members, starting to ask the clients, the customers, what do you expect from this brand? What are you looking for? What's your job to be done for those familiar with design thinking? What do you have to do in a day that implicates the fact that at some point you will need us as a brand, but we're only part of a whole process? What's that process? How can we know better about that? And make sure that in the content that we bring you, we demonstrate that we understand where we stand in the entire job to be done, for example. So really the first thing is to start thinking or think about the audiences. One thing that we like to do a lot, and that is actually something that we've done a few times with a market research partner here in Montreal, is actually ask the audience, so through a large scale poll or a panel of non-customers, what are your needs and expectations in terms of content from a brand like blank? And like name the brand or name the industry, just to see if we can figure out any blind spots, like I mentioned earlier, that are not being covered in the industry that should be. One of the things that came up in one of those case studies is that it was a sports and outdoor equipment retail branch that wanted to know what should they produce in terms of articles, podcasts, videos, and so on. And that was about 10 years ago. It's a really old example, but it really shows where you can find those blind spots. So there were all the usual suspects that came back from those panels saying, oh, we'd love to have this type of content, this type, how to train for a half marathon, how to prepare your backpack for a hike. Okay, that's been done. You can try to do with the 10x the best piece of content and so on, but it's been done. But what came out, which was really interesting in that study, is that people asked to know more about mental health and sports. Now, in 2025, it's very common to talk about mental health, sports, leisure activities, and being outside. Extremely common. Rewind 10 years ago,
it sure wasn't.
So, but that was actually in the answers from that poll. People wanted that but no one was covering it. At least no one named REI or Mountain Equipment Co-op here, or no one was doing that, but people wanted that. And so there were niche opportunities of content that would have made that any brand differentiated in its market, and it didn't come from something much more complicated than a survey monkey being sent to your mailing list, or maybe the ambassadors or the ones that really love you, and saying, hey guys, what do you want? What could we do? And 95% of that will be, okay, we knew that. But that 5% and that cream at the top is going to be amazing.
But to put a pin in this is why it is so critical to let your marketers, and specifically your content marketers, speak to your customers.
Yes.
There have been so many organizations that I've worked with where the marketing team never got to speak to customers. Occasionally, maybe they could listen in on customer service calls, or they were allowed to, have a meeting with the salesperson who would then tell them things about the customers. But there was this reluctance in so many organizations into letting the marketing folks actually talk to the customers and have the kinds of conversations where you would be able to uncover this. Because at no point, with your example with the outdoor retailer, at no point would a sales associate on the floor be able to tell marketing that was an idea of something that people were really interested in talking about. It's not going to happen. They don't have time on the floor to be talking at that length or depth with customers if they're going to stay in business, at least. So, it's so critical to either to allow the surveying, if that's certainly a great way to validate once you've had some of those one-on-one conversations. But even like having things like the customer advisory boards, I thought, well, silly me, I worked at Charles Schwab for 10 years. So I thought, of course, every company must have a customer advisory board for their major points of business. Wow, how I was very, very young, obviously, when I had that job, and very deluded. I thought that obviously you would do that because it's such an inexpensive, smart way to have a direct line between your business, your product, your marketing, and the people you're trying to serve. And now, of course, I realize that very few companies really do that. And it's such a shame because you will get those amazing 10x kinds of ideas from your customers if you're only allowing people to talk to them.
And humans love to help. And if you're asking for their help, their opinion, they will tell you. If you ask them what doesn't work, they will tell you what doesn't work. And that's going to be a very boring meeting. But if you ask them what's missing, what would you like, how can we make you not waste your time with our newsletters, with our content? How would that look? Those conversations can be amazing. And to really do a little off tangent on this is I was mentioning about using transcriptions from client calls to actually excerpt those content challenges. Well, nowadays, if you don't have the possibility to create a customer advisory board, or if you cannot speak to clients direct, but there exists sales calls and there's this transcripts of those, you can actually start having conversations with these people that were on those calls through what they said and how any form of AI might interpret that. Now, that's level 2. You always want to try to have level 1. You want to speak directly to someone, but there are ways also to try and duplicate that in some other shape or form.
Now, of course, I would be remiss if I let you off the hook without asking you about what some of the KPIs are that when we're taking this kind of approach, which is a different approach to our content and to our marketing, like what are the KPIs that we can use to prove that this is actually this differentiated approach, this being useful, is creating that lifetime customer or creating that value? Because, people like the idea of you send an email with a promotion, people click on it, redeem it, purchase. But so many, things, be it B2B or services or, big purchases, are not that simple. That's not a reasonable KPI. So what was your advice for, when content marketers want to make this kind of a change? What KPIs should they propose to use instead to show that what they're doing is working and making a difference?
It's not easy. So the classic KPIs of content consumption are, of course, part of this. Whenever you create content, you want to measure its consumption. That's one thing. Another thing that you can start looking at, but it involves being in a close-knit relationship with, let's say, in B2B, the sales team. But it's actually trying to detect mentions of your content in those conversations. Because what happens is that if you're differentiated, you will have a unique point of view. When you have a unique point of view, you have a way of saying things that you will hear back from people. And you can see this in any business, in any family. When someone is differentiated and has influence, people will start using their expressions. They will start using their emojis. They will start using things that the other person uses. So when you start seeing that, that is a sign, but it's a very soft KPI, but that is a sign that your content is actually making a dent. When people are using the expressions or the title of the report that you created, the state of, and so on. So that's one thing. Another thing is to try and figure out if anyone else is actually copying you in some shape or form. If people start copying you, is because you're doing something different that seems to be resonating with everyone. So whenever you see someone doing the same thing you are, that means that, well, for one, you may not be as differentiated as you were in the future. So we'll need to keep innovating in the ways and the types of content that you produce. But it's a way of seeing that you're doing it the right way. So there are no really hardcore and hard KPIs that we can look for differentiation. It's a bit similar to how strong your brand is. You need to go in the market, you need to ask, and you need to kind of ask that question. Do you feel this brand is different from the other brands and how it's providing value? Yes, that is a way, but that costs a lot, and it's the type of studies that could be long term.
Yeah. And, frequently you'll find that brands that have a big advertising and PR budget are going to be the ones that will be measuring brand sentiment and brand share of voice and how familiar people are with whatever your campaign or slogan is. But it's not necessary per se, because I think you hit on a bunch of really core ways that you can tell that people are paying attention. Like I know somebody's been to my website or read a few of my longer form pieces. If they say, your no more random acts of content really inspires me. I really relate to that, because it's something that if you are my kind of content person, when you see that on my website, when you see me talking about it somewhere, you go, yes, because you've had to create that random content that had nothing to do with your strategy, that you knew was not going to connect with people, because you have to make this piece of content because so-and-so asked for it. So I totally agree that you can get creative when you're thinking about content's impact. And you can look at things like, what's the long-term client value, and is it increasing over time? And are these people opting in to getting your newsletters? Are they attending your events? So there are all of these things that if you're doing a great job with your content, that they are going to start going up and to the right. So even if you can't say that content's the only lever, you can at least tell that people consuming that content is having the desired effect.
It has the impact. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So we're almost out of time. So I got to ask you first, if you had one last, piece of wisdom or advice for folks who are really interested in figuring out how to use content to differentiate and become a truly useful brand, what is your one biggest piece of advice?
Have the courage to publish something that you feel could help your competitors. If you have the feeling that you are publishing something that could, and by helping, it's helping the market, not the competitors themselves, but helping the market that you live in. If you have the courage to publish something that helps the entire market because it wasn't there, that's being differentiated. You're acting as the expert. That's one way to be differentiated. It's acting as the expert in the field. And there's tons of studies that show that you will be part of the preferred solutions. You will be able to sell a little more expensive than the other guys, have a little premium compared to the other guy. There are so many examples of the high impact that it can have on the market that you are playing in. I think that courage to publish something different is actually something to look for.
I love that. So if folks are looking to hear more from you and the Toast team, what are the best places to follow you and to get more of your content?
Well, LinkedIn, connect with me. That's always a good spot. I basically mention what we do, what we publish also. Other than that, there's tons of content. Some of it differentiated. Some of it might be similar to the other guys. That's how we work also on toaststudio.com. And we're basically everywhere. So we're easy to find.
I love it. Alex, thank you so much for kind of recreating our conversation here for everybody. I hope that you've given people the courage to create differently because people want it.
Yeah,
So
don't
thank
go
you
the
so
easy
much.
route. Be courageous.
I love it.
Thank you.
Until
Thank you
next
so
time.
much, Erika, for inviting me.
My pleasure. Bye, everyone. We'll see you next week for the next content chat.
Ciao.